Good afternoon, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, John. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good. For people who have tuned in, Scott Hennig is the president of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and it's obviously a timely discussion with the Canadian election that's happened overnight here in the UK. And we're waking up to some rather interesting news that the Liberals have won in quite interesting and I suppose, shocking circumstances to external viewers, Scott. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives had quite a big lead and have lost that lead clearly, and indeed Pierre Poilievre has lost his seat as well. So, would you be able just to give us a quick overview of what's happened, who's up, who's down, and what it actually means in sort of headline terms?
Okay, well, let's start back in 1867. I'm just kidding. Well, John, I saw one analysis today that said that everyone's disappointed with the election results, and I think that's the most accurate assessment of it. The Liberals, going into the election, going into election day yesterday, thought they were going to win a majority. Now that's significantly different than where we were 6 months ago, but they thought they were going to get a majority. They ended up with a minority. They're disappointed. The Conservatives 6 months ago were looking at one of the largest majorities ever they could ever have gotten in the history of Canadian politics. So a lot of their supporters are disappointed that they didn't come through with that massive majority. Those who, still were delusional and thought the polls were all completely wrong, still were thinking there was going to be a majority situation. Others, like me, I actually assumed there would be a liberal majority. So, it was actually that wasn't a big shock to me that the Conservatives didn't win the election. But so they're disappointed. The NDP, which is our New Democrat Party, which would be akin to your Lib Dems, left of the Liberals, essentially your Labor. They were completely annihilated in the election, so they're disappointed. They've lost all but they went from having 25 seats down to seven, probably once all the final vote count comes in, probably seven. The Bloc Québécois, which is a unique thing to Canada. We have a separatist party that only runs candidates in the province of Quebec, although province of Quebec is our second largest section of the country. They lost a few seats when they were poised again 6 months ago to be gaining 20 seats. They lost two or three seats. So they're disappointed. The Greens, even that usually have one or two seats, they thought they were going to get a second seat. They're back down to one. They're disappointed. So everyone's mad about the election results, no matter how it sits. So it's an interesting result. It's one that was certainly. I would say going into the election day, all the polls suggested that we would have a liberal majority. So that's the only real shocking thing is that it isn't a majority, but it's darn close. 168 seats needed 172 for the majority. They're only four seats away from a majority government. That is really close, and I think there's something to be taken away for all the parties based on that result.
Yeah, and what does that, for people who maybe aren't very on top of the machinations of Canadian politics, what does that mean? If they're just short of a majority, does that mean they have to form a coalition? How can they govern if they're just short of a majority?
Yeah. So, we have a very similar system to the UK in that we don't have a proportional system like they have in New Zealand, where there's lists and whatnot. Yeah, they either need to, and in fact, we've had primarily minority governments since 2004. There's only been a few. I think we've only had two 4-year terms of majority since 2004. So in the last 20 years, the majority of our time has been under minority. So you can do it a couple different ways. You can either just have you roll the dice and you kind of play chicken as the minority government with the other opposition parties. Sometimes you need all three opposition parties to take you down. Sometimes you only need two. In this case, they're going to need all three, and they did need all three in the last parliament as well. We had a minority government for the last 3 years, so nothing much changes, with the exception of previously we did have a supply and confidence agreement between the New Democrat Party, the NDP, your Lib Dems, and our Liberal government. They agreed that they would never take them down. They would agree to pass budgets. They would agree to all the confidence motions to ensure there wouldn't be an election and a loss of confidence. But it hurt them. It hurt them significantly. It really co-opted the NDP's ability to hold the government to account and pull them to the left. In fact, I'm not sure you could have pulled the Trudeau government further to the left. They were a by far the most left-leaning liberal government of my lifetime, maybe in Canadian history. It was they really went and co-opted that space on the left where the NDP sat and did a better job than the NDP did. So, despite the fact that the NDP went around and waved, little baubles here and there and said, "Look what we got you by the supply and confidence agreement," they really didn't get any credit for any of the things that people liked that got done. So, and the result was they lost most of their seats. So I can't see. I mean, there is a scenario they have 7 seats, or they will probably end up with 7 seats. There is a scenario in which that could happen. They have the votes. They could just rely on the NDP to prop them up, and the NDP will probably prop them up for a while. Their leader lost his seat last night. He resigned as leader. All of that was expected, even if he had run in the election, even if he had called the election early, with Trudeau still in place, likely would have still ended up losing his seat and giving up the party leadership. He's been there for 7 years. They've never made any inroads. So they're in no hurry to they're in no hurry whatsoever to get into any sort of agreement again with the government, but they're also in no rush to take down the government. So they're probably gonna be in this weird position where they kind of have to shake their fist at the government while voting for all of the bills and motions they put forward.
Right. And to sort of step back a bit, obviously, Mark Carney, who took over the Canadian Liberals, took over from Justin Trudeau. And it seems, at least from our perspective overseas, that Trudeau was uniquely unpopular going into this election. And the Liberals did a good job, basically, of junking a very unpopular leader just in time for the election. What were the sort of key themes around the idea of getting rid of Trudeau, bringing in someone like Mark Carney? What message were they trying to send? Was it about competence, bringing in that managerial style, or is there something else we're missing?
Yeah, that and anything else. I mean, the reality was that Trudeau was the most unpopular liberal leader they've had again, in many, many, many years, maybe ever in my lifetime. And he couldn't have sunk any further below in the polls than he was. So bringing in any warm body that wasn't named Justin Trudeau was going to go up in the polls. And traditionally, if you look back, you see this honeymoon phase where anyone looks better than the guy that they all hate. And that was certainly the case for Mark Carney. And the thing that Mark Carney and his team, I mean, it's the same people. The cabinet is almost exactly the same. The advisors, the people who advise Trudeau are advising Carney. Like they've really just swapped out the leader. And philosophically, he's not significantly different. If you've read his book, Values, he is just as radical in his views of what should happen with the environment and the world economy and everything else as Trudeau was. Like they're cut of the same cloth. This was his economic advisor for the past 5 or 6 years. So they're very similar, but the people around him who are the advisors are no dummies. They have won many elections and they know what they're doing. And they went and said, look, there's a bunch of very unpopular policies that we can just throw that rope around Trudeau's neck, let him hang for it. You can walk away from them, even despite the fact that you may agree with them. And one is the carbon tax. We had a carbon tax here put in place in 2015. Thanks to the work of us and I would say the Conservative Party and some others, it's become one of the most unpopular policies of the Trudeau government. But they were ideologically tied to it. He's seen it as his magnus opus. It was going to be what he was going to be remembered for, and it is what he's going to be remembered for, but not in a positive way now. And Mark Carney said, "Here, you can take it. You can take it. You can own that one. I'm going to get rid of it." And he instantly jettisoned it. He jettisoned capital gains tax hikes, which was another thing that they were trying to push as a attack on the rich. And Carney said, "No, no, it's bad policy. People don't like it. We're getting rid of it," despite the fact that he probably agrees with the policy. So he's been, I would say, he was a very malleable leader coming in, and his advisors advised him very smartly to get rid of unpopular policy. I would say that's part of it. They struck while the iron was hot. They struck during the honeymoon phase. I do honestly believe if this election was another 2 weeks later, they probably would have lost. The polls were tightening up. The Conservatives were making a surge. And traditionally, what we've seen is that when you have this honeymoon phase, it ends. It ends pretty quickly. If we go back to 1984, we had Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, step down as prime minister. Again, John Turner came in, wildly popular, called an election immediately, but he called a very long election. He called a 60-day election. By the time he got halfway through the campaign, he was up by 10 points in the polls. By the time they got to election day, the shine had worn off on how popular he was in the honeymoon phase, lost in a spectacular fashion. That's probably what would have happened had this election been called 2 weeks later. And so, credit to Mark Carney, credit to the people around him. They are very, very smart. They called the election at the right time. And they also had a bit of luck. And that luck came in the form of a guy named Donald Trump.
Okay. Yeah. We'll come back to Donald Trump, but just to pick apart this carbon tax, what is it? What does it apply to? How did it impact ordinary Canadians?
Yeah, so it was a carbon tax that went up on April 1st every single year. They bumped it up by I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head by $10 a ton, whatever that means, because we all know we buy our carbon in tons at the at the local corner store. The reality was it was adding about 30 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. It was adding about $50 onto your average monthly heating bill, depending on what size of house you had. The reality was it was costing Canadians well over $1,000 a year on average. They did give rebates. That was their kicker to say, look, we're not mean people who are punishing you with this big tax. We're redistributing the money. We have a parliamentary budget officer, which is an independent officer of parliament that went through the numbers and said, even after the rebates, the average Canadian is still behind when it comes to the carbon tax. And really, I mean, Canada is a massive cold country. I mean, this is not like you can look at a map and just look at where we are in the map and how big we are. This is not a surprise to anyone to hear that the country that loves playing outdoor hockey and snowmobiling is cold and big. And the problem with that is that we only have 40 million people live here. So we can't put bullet trains in between all of our centers so that people can whip around and not drive cars. Cars are a necessity in Canada to get you to work and get you around the country. And heating your home is also not an option. We every single house has to have a way of heating it, and the majority of the way that we heat our homes is with natural gas in this country. So the majority of the country was paying this massive tax. It was wildly unpopular, and the Trudeau government didn't care. They were ideologically committed to a climate change policy that wasn't actually impacting climate change, wasn't reducing greenhouse gas. In fact, if you look at greenhouse gas emissions, they went down further in the United States, which is a country that does not have a carbon tax, than it went down in Canada that does have a carbon tax. So it was a policy that was not only not achieving the results that it had hoped for, it was punishing people for doing things that were non-optional, like driving and heating your home. So very unpopular and very expensive. Now, they've got rid of the consumer side of the carbon tax. There is still an industrial carbon tax that is being applied. And while the Conservatives had promised to jettison that as well, Mark Carney said that they're going to keep that in place and may even look to increase it. So the carbon tax fight is unfortunately not over for this organization, for Canadians. It'll be more hidden. It won't be as obvious where it's going, but it will be hitting production of gas. It'll be hitting production of fertilizer. We're a big country of growing food. We supply food to a lot of other countries around the world. All food costs are going to go up if they jack up that cost of fertilizer, and certainly the cost of driving and heating your homes are going to continue to go up if they put an even larger industrial carbon tax in place. So that fight's not over, but certainly they blinked pretty hard on it, and we think that if we continue to push, we might get them to blink again.
Right, and again, you've mentioned this already, but Mark Carney's green credentials for you know to put it not too fine a point. He when he was governor of the Bank of England, he started to introduce how do our decisions as a Bank of England and the interest rate decisions they make and all this kind of stuff, and how can we sort of bake in climate change objectives into those interest rate decisions and all this kind of stuff. So his credentials on this stuff are quite clear. So it seems that it's a pure electoral gain to junk this carbon tax, right? So if
100%.
if his advisors are, roughly the same. He still basically agrees with that agenda. Um, if they were very ruthless in getting rid of this stuff in order for electoral gain, what agenda are they going to push in power? If they've gotten rid of the carbon tax, what is it about Mark Carney's agenda that still marries with what some of Trudeau was doing beyond the carbon tax?
Well, Trudeau was certainly no fiscal hawk, ran up the largest deficits we've seen in Canadian history, some of it during the pandemic, but much of it after the pandemic and even pre-pandemic. In fact, they've not once balanced the budget in the 10 years that Justin Trudeau's been in power. Mark Carney has promised that and more. And remarkably and surprising to all of us, as a guy who really sells himself on being a real smart fiscal banker, someone who worked on Wall Street, who knows the ins and outs of finance. He loves debt. Like he loves debt way more than Trudeau even did, and committed in his platform to considerably more debt than what we were expecting and what the Trudeau government had planned in the first place. Now he'll differentiate and say, well, this is infrastructure debt. We're going to be, building and growing and whatnot. Um, Debt is debt, and the bills come in the same way. You still have to borrow the money from someone, and you still have to pay them back. And we fully expect that our debt problem is going to get worse, and that is going to be a big challenge for this next government. But honestly, I don't think that the average Canadian. I mean, both the conservative and liberal platforms came out in the last week of the campaign. A quarter of Canadians already voted in advanced polls at that point. People were not voting for the platforms. They were voting against Donald Trump, and they were voting for what they viewed as change, whether it was a slight change from the current guys or a significant change. But the vast majority of Canadians voted. In fact, I would say every Canadian essentially voted for change from what we've had. We'll see whether they actually get any significant change. I'm not expecting. I don't have high hopes for significant change. But I do think that at least at the very beginning, there's opportunities to push Carney with a minority government and with the fact that he is not married to any of these old policies. I think there's an opportunity to get some wins on some of the additionally bad stuff that Trudeau did, and even push back on some of the bad ideas in the platform if they're actually going to follow through on their platform. Which I'm not holding my breath.
Right. And one of the big problems in the UK, I'm going to assume it's the same, but you maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's this assumption in SW1 Westminster circles that we just need to spend this amount of money, but we just need to tweak tax levers in order to pay for it without journeying back to that first question and saying, why are we spending this much money? What does it go on? Can we do it more efficiently, et cetera, et cetera? Are there spending plans of concern or?
Like the platform was not that detailed. They have not come out and said that they've got sort of these, massive grand white elephant plans that we can point to. They did say they're going to spend a ton on infrastructure. I am worried that it will look like, setting up. I sort of referenced earlier bullet trains, high-speed rail trains around the country, which don't make any economic sense in a country that's as large as Canada and has such a little population. They barely make sense in small, highly densely populated countries like Japan. They will definitely not make sense in Canada, but I think that'll be, that'll fit in with their nation building, infrastructure building, green washing platform. So I expect to see stuff like that. But I mean, they also committed to, they're not going to be firing any bureaucrats. They're going to continue to increase operational spending. They're just going to slow the growth of operational spending, which, some like the NDP said was a cut. It's not. They're going to continue to grow operational spending. I'm hopeful that we will see. It can go one of two ways. The Mark Carney, who is trying to go by his values in his book and show everybody that he's such a great world citizen, and I can see that spending go wild. The guy that is a banker and hopefully understands bottom lines maybe will dial it back. We have yet to see. He's only been the prime minister for a couple months. He hasn't really done anything other than campaign. We actually don't know anything about him or how he's going to govern in reality. So this is really we're going to be kind of fumbling around in the dark for a little while.
So, Scott, we were talking about spending and whether that's going to go up or down, how that impacts the debt, and you're of the opinion perhaps that there's going to be lots more borrowing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not sure the Canadians have the appetite right now for tax hikes. Will they try to go and do something, a tax, a wealth tax, a tax on the rich that's always been threatened? Carney, being a wealthy guy, may not be that inclined. I think he doesn't want to be the skunk at the garden party when he shows up to some of his some of his former colleagues who are all of a sudden paying 58% in tax or something. So I think he'll probably avoid that, but that's generally where these guys go looking for money. It's generally just in the couch cushions. It's not that much money, but it certainly feeds the class warfare in this country, and that's usually good for votes.
Yeah. And just to flip things around, flip the lens around, what does it mean for the Conservatives? Obviously, started off with quite a healthy lead not too long ago, and that's been obviously overturned. And what does it mean for Pierre Poilievre himself, having lost his seat?
Yeah, I mean the seat is an interesting one. It's he's in an Ottawa riding, so Ottawa being our capital. He's in a riding that I think about a third of his voters are federal bureaucrats whose jobs were probably going to be on the line if they elected him. I think these people voted in their own self-interest. That certainly Carney wasn't promising to cut any staff, whereas Pierre was. I think that really, and he wasn't able to campaign in his riding. This is a riding that when he was not leader, would door knock every single door every single year. Now he's not able to do that. So he lost the election. It's not stunning. It's a little surprising that he lost his seat, but it's not stunning considering the riding. I have it on, pretty good authority. He's going to be looking for a seat somewhere in the West, in a safe seat, get someone to resign and run in a by-election. I fully expect that to happen. I fully expect him to stay on as leader. I mean, the results, despite the fact that it's disappointing compared to where they were 6 months ago, and maybe they made a few mistakes here and there along the campaign. The reality is that they got 41.5% of the vote. That's the most number of votes, the highest percentage of the vote they've received since 1988, higher than when Stephen Harper won his majority government in 2011. They were at 39.6% of the vote that time. The difference is that the Bloc Québécois, our separatist party, and the NDP, their vote collapsed. And for the Conservatives to win with 40 some percent of the vote, they require either the Bloc to take a bunch of Liberal seats, because the Quebec is typically a battle between the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. There's a small number of seats that the Conservatives tend to get every election, regardless. They have this like little rump of rural seats around Quebec City that they win. And then in the West, particularly in British Columbia, the NDP split the vote with the Liberals and end up allowing the Conservatives to win a lot of seats with 33-35% of the vote. That didn't happen. Those NDP votes evaporated. A lot of it went to a lot of them went to the Liberals. A little bit went to the Conservatives. Conservatives certainly made inroads with union voters this last time, blue collar workers. So I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't expect him to leave. I think that especially with a minority government, we could be back into an election in 2 to 3 years' time. Particularly if the Conservatives move up in the polls, the Bloc will probably stay where they are or move back up a little bit, and the NDP can't honestly get any lower than this. Is one of the worst election results they've had in 3 decades. So. I can't expect that they're going to get any worse. And when we get to a position 2.5 years from now where all three parties look like they'll gain seats with an election being called, they'll probably trigger an election.
Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. And just to wrap up, how significant was Donald Trump in all of this?
Way too significant. I mean, it's maddening that a foreign leader who has a tendency just to spout off ridiculous things that people don't take all that seriously got people to take him seriously during a Canadian election. I mean, this whole 51st state thing was laughable to most people, but to some people it was a serious threat. And they panicked and decided that they thought that Mark Carney was maybe the better one to deal with Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump's popularity has never been lower in Canada than it is right now. But the few people that do still support him likely voted for the Conservative Party. It created a bit of a problem for the Conservatives in that they couldn't bash Donald Trump as hard as they might have liked to for fear of annoying a handful of their voters, although certainly a minority of their voters, but a voting bloc that they needed. They definitely don't want to go back to splitting the right vote. We did the right wing split of the vote for many, many years and elected liberals from, 1993 all the way through 2006. So no one's wanting to go back to that. And so they were really cautious about how hard they went at Trump. Which just gave an opportunity for Carney to go out and be the strong man that Canada was looking for to push back against Trump. So I don't expect that, 2, 3 years from now in another election, Trump is going to be the number one issue. I didn't expect it this one, nor did any of the parties. So Carney just pivoted and handled it better than anyone else, to be sure.
Yeah, okay. Final minute, Scott. Much like the TPA in the UK, it doesn't really matter who's in power as long as they're spending, wasting taxpayers' money, putting taxes up. We're up for the fight. A very quick minute on what it means for you guys at the CTF and what you've got planned.
Yeah, I mean, I think a renewed focus on debts and deficits, wasteful spending. I mean, we'll certainly be fighting any tax hikes, but I think what happened this election, it was an indication to us that not enough people cared enough about the debt and deficits, and that's got to change. And so we'll be meeting with our team in person next week, getting them all together. Just happened to work out that way, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to come up with. But I'm certain that we're going to have a renewed focus on debts and deficits and getting our fiscal house back in order.
Yeah, back to the basics. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. For people watching from the UK, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation are one of the best groups in the world at what they do. So I would encourage you to go onto taxpayer.com, have a look at what they do. And if they're doing stuff that you think we should be doing in the UK, please do let us know. But they're an inspiration to groups around the world. And Scott in particular has been a very important mentor to taxpayer groups across the world. So thank you, Scott, for what you're doing, and good luck in the next few years.
No, thanks so much, and the feeling is mutual, John.
Cheers. Thank you, Scott.